The Igbos in Nigeria had a well-established system called village democracy. It is an unforgivable historical mistake to teach African children in government and in the field of political science that democracy started in Athens in ancient Greece. The Igbos already had a well-established democratic system, which, as I said earlier, it is called the village democracy. A lot of critics always ask why most Pan-Africanists use Egypt as an example while describing the civilization of Africa. The fact is that the history of Africa will remain suspended in air and cannot be written correctly until African historians connect it with the history of Egypt. Egypt was not the only state that was civilized in Africa. Other African states were also civilized in terms of art, science, and engineering. Apart from Egypt, kingdoms like Benin had great civilization and art invention. Today, those inventions are in the museum of the white man who said we are not civilized. Now, before European imperialism in Africa, the Yorubas in Nigeria were also civilized. They had a well-established system. The system of separation of powers and checks and balances was not new to Africans. The Yorubas, especially the old Oyo Empire, had such system. The powers of the Alaafin was checkmated by the Oyomesi. The powers of the Oyomesi was checkmated by the Ogboni courts. And they also had a strong military organ named the Ariona Kakanfo. Before European contact with the Africans, the Igbos in Nigeria had a well-established system called village democracy. It is an unforgivable historical mistake to teach African children in government and in the field of political science that democracy started in Athens in ancient Greece. The Igbos already had a well-established democratic system, which, as I said earlier, it is called the village democracy, whereby power is decentralized among different institutions in the communities. Before the establishment of Oxford and Cambridge University, Africans had the oldest university in the world, established in Fars, Morocco, around 859 AD, which is called the Al-Kairouan University. We also had the Al-Azhar University, established in Cairo, Egypt, which is 620 years older than the Oxford and Cambridge University in Europe. When the white first came in contact with Africans, they kowtowed. They bowed down to African kings, to African emperors and African elders. They saw our art and invention. They saw our traditional wares. We were not black monkeys as they described us in their Hollywood movie industry. We wore our traditional clothes. We had a moral system that guided us in line with purity, sincerity, and peace. Our African children were brought up in line with morals. Did you know that once a child is born in Africa, that child belongs to the community? There was egalitarianism and collectivism, not today's individualism that encourages selfishness and capitalism. Today, our African children engage in pornography, masturbation, and other immoralities. This shows how our moral system has collapsed through globalization. In Africa, marriage lasts longer more than today's Africa. What you see today in Africa was not known in Africa yesterday. Today, we value the European white wedding more than our African traditional marriage. We spend millions just for wedding. Sometimes, after the traditional marriage is done, we still go ahead to waste money on white wedding. This is the marriage, this is the traditional marriage of the white people in Europe. We are deceived to believe that until a marriage is done in the church, that is when such marriage can be blessed. But before the penetration of Christianity in Africa, our African marriage was not done in churches. Rather, the both families and few of their friends come together to recognize the journey together of their children. There was no big celebration. Everything was done in simple form, and the marriage lasts longer than today's wedding. The fact is that the invention of colonialism has made us to see everything Africa as evil and everything European as good. Our parents rejected our native names and gave us the white man's name. They are brainwashed to believe that our ancestral names will bring ancestral curse to us. Some of us were given our names without our decision through baptism. Although we were children who don't know anything. Some of us, like myself, never realized this until all my certificate is written with foreign names. In order not to allow our traditional names to die, we had to go to court to swear an affidavit and added 1 or 2 native names. We celebrate the white man's wedding, but yet the white man do not celebrate our traditional wedding. In the aspect of science, African communities depended on traditional medicinal roots, where they mix it to cure sickness. There was nothing like HIV, coronavirus, Ebola, or any deadly pandemic or epidemic in Africa. Africans treated themselves through their own traditional or native doctor means. It is a historical mistake for the whites to claim that Africa was uncivilized before their arrival. Before the Europeans got to their level of renaissance and enlightenment, Africans had already built the pyramids and other great structures. We were not naked and we were not wearing leaf as clothes. We were well dressed in our own African clothes. It is important that we should pass the right knowledge to our children and the ones yet unborn. Our educational system is nothing else but the European educational system which we adopted. It is a colonial education.